Good morning, everyone. So excited to be back on live and also in my home. The last time I did a live last week, it was for while I was on vacation. So super happy to be back with everyone today. So I've got kind of a story I want to share with you all that I think, anyways, I just want to share it. It's something that's coming up that I just want to talk about a little bit. So as we have been, hi Candace, welcome. As we have been on this journey together and I've been sharing certain concepts, I wanted to share a little bit about how this is applying in my life, especially around this book that I've created and other things I've been working on around as well. So as you have all been listening and hearing, I talk a lot about the shadow self and the noble self. So for those who may just be joining our community, the noble self is the soul. Hey Burton, welcome. And the shadow self is the ego. And these are two pieces of us that we are given both what I would call light and darkness, but I wouldn't say good and bad. I would say that the shadow and the noble self have important parts to play with us. But the important thing is that we remember that it is the noble self, the soul, that should be who we listen to when we make decisions, when we figure out where we're going, what we're doing in life. And that our shadow self is helpful to give us warning signs and maybe to give us a little bit of an understanding of things that we might be cautious about, but we shouldn't make decisions from a place of fear. And that's what the shadow self normally tends to do. So that's just a quick, reminder of some of the basics as I go into this. Hey Femi, welcome. I wanted to share as a context as I share now my story. So as I've mentioned previously, the reason that I am so wanting to share those concepts is because I found in my own life that I have been able to really get to a point of being able to listen to my noble self most of the time. It doesn't mean my shadow self doesn't show up. In fact, she should, because she's still part of me. But I'm able to do things and get past things that I wouldn't have done in the past, get past my fears, because the shadow self is less impactful to me. I no longer say, oh, maybe you have a point being like fearful of this thing. As an example, had I listened to my shadow self, there is no chance that I would have published a book a month ago. Not a chance. It would have scared me. I think it would scare most people, especially as many of you guys have read it. It's very vulnerable. It's very open. It shares lots of my story. But my noble self said, no, this is important. This is two things. This is both the expression of myself and what I believe about this idea of the noble self wanting to be listened to more is because it helps us to understand our design. So if you guys have seen, of course, the name of my book is Follow Your Design, Rediscovering Your Truth and Your Purpose. And so in this, I believe that every one of us has a design that we were given when we came here to this world. And for the most part, some of us have followed it all the way through, and some of us had to rediscover it. Or some of us know that we haven't rediscovered it, and here we are, and we're trying to figure out what's next. And so finding the design is the place where our noble self is fully expressed. It's the place where our noble self can be big. There's a couple places in my book where I talk about that I truly believe that each of us are to be in this world and to be big. And what I mean by that is to not be hampered by societal pressures to be a certain way or get a certain job or act a certain status quo kind of way. But if we are to be an artist, be an artist. If we are to be a financial person, do that. If we are, but whatever it is, it's whatever we're to be comes out of our own selves and our own understanding of ourselves, and not from this is the practical thing to do, or this is the thing my parents said, or this is the thing that allows me to just kind of get through life, right? I truly believe we're supposed to be big. So this is kind of my story of still learning how to be big, if that makes sense. So what ended up happening for me is that last fall, as my noble self got stronger and stronger, and for those of you guys who have read the book, I talk about self-abandonment. So last summer was when I had gone through an experience where I had abandoned my needs again. And in coming back to myself and increasing my self-love again, my noble self got stronger again. Like it felt like it was like I'd really like reached kind of another level of like really listening, because I realized in my self-abandonment I'd stopped listening again, even though I had learned all these things. And so so last fall my noble self was super strong, still is. I don't want to say was, but I started noticing more. And what that means to me is that I was able to, even when I wasn't in meditation or I wasn't in quiet, I was able to kind of start to hear, oh, do this thing right now. And I was like, okay. And so in the fall, I was prompted to sit down at my computer and write out basically what would it look like for me to do what I had always wanted to do. So for some of you guys may know, but some may not, I had always and have always seen myself as someone that would be a coach or a teacher. I ended up in corporate world and for various reasons, but I always saw myself doing that. And I had said maybe a couple of years ago, I think I'll do that once my daughter is off in college and I'll figure out where I want to live and what I want to be doing, etc. She's a senior this coming fall. And so I knew that was coming and I thought, okay, that's fine. We'll just wait till that point. And so in the fall, instead, my noble voice or my noble self said, just sit down and just write out what it would look like to work with you as a coach. I said, okay, let me write this out. And I wrote it, and some of you guys may have experienced this. It wrote through me. It basically was like it felt so right. I felt like I didn't have to think it through. It just came kind of naturally. And so, including, what would it be like to work with me as a coach, even all the way down to like, what's my pricing, right? And it was like, this is getting super detailed. Okay, well, let's just keep brainstorming. Like, this is what's flowing through. Let's keep going. And so I finished writing it, and it was, it felt so affirming and so confirming to me that okay, this is something that I would love to do. And I just, that was it. At the end of the writing process, my noble self was like, okay, that's cool. Just, save it. And, at some point in the future, I'm going to have you send this out to a few friends and just get an idea if this feels right. Does this sound like me? Does this, just kind of get some feedback, right? I have a very tight inner circle of people who I trust wholeheartedly. And I thought, okay, that's my, what I call is that's my crew, right? That's my group and the people I can trust. And so, but it said, we'll tell you when it's time. Maybe like, I don't know, 6 weeks later, all of a sudden it was like, oh, time to send it. And I was like, okay. And so I sent it, I don't know, maybe 5-10 people. I don't remember exactly. And people were like, this is great. And here's some edits and, just wonderful feedback. But also a few of these close friends said to me, oh, when can I start? I want you to be my coach. And I said, oh, wait. That's not the exercise here. I just wanted to see if, what did you think about this thing I wrote up? Like, does it sound like me in tone? Would you feel like if you read it and you didn't know me, it would feel like me, right? But of course, I heard people saying, no, I would love to work with you. And I okay, well, let's step into that space. So this is, a first little step for me getting, a little bit bigger. And so, since then until now, I've had, 10, 15 clients I've been working with coaching. I've been loving the process. I've been really feeling and learning about my own intuition in the process, and really being in a space of being able to feel where that person is, and then also to share things that might be coming through me. So it's been a process. It's been very interesting. So at the same time that all of that was happening with the coaching, I also started to hear, oh, you know what? Because I a couple different clients, where as I was sharing with them, there seemed to be like a model that was showing up in my head. Like I was noticing things that I was seeing different people going through, and I was like, oh, these, this piece might help you, self-love, right? This piece might help you, oh, noble self. This piece, what about the shadow, right? It was like all these things. And it kept coming up, and I was like, oh, this is a pattern. Maybe this is a model. Maybe there's like an order to these things. Maybe there's a process that's underlying. So as I started thinking about that, like my noble self was like, yeah, absolutely. And actually, just like try to do a course in the spring. And you should work with men. And it's very interesting to me to have heard that information, because I have been working for 20, 30, I don't know, however many years, in women's groups and women's empowerment, both as a facilitator, as a participant, some of them in my religious community, some of them beyond. So it was a space I was so comfortable with. I naturally was drawn to mentoring younger women at my work, for instance. That was just kind of my natural inclination. And so, when it said, "Oh, do this with men," I thought, "Oh, interesting. Okay, let's see what that might feel like and see what that would do." So I'm in the middle right now of working with a group of 4 men going through this model. The course is going well, and so I've not only am I listening, hearing my noble self, but I'm also been listening, and almost every step of the way, it's been really, and then okay. So you'll see this as a theme as I go forward, right? Really? Okay. And then the okay is I end up doing the thing and then seeing what I learn through the process. But because my shadow self is quieter, I'm able to do that. I'm not stopping myself in the middle going, no, there's no way. Like, who am I as a woman working with men? Like, no, that doesn't make sense. I don't know, like whatever dialogue we're trying to create, right? Or wait, I'm not trying to actually do coaching. I just wanted to see if this made sense for a couple of years from now. What? Right? So all of this, my shadow self, we're saying those things, but my noble self was like, it's cool. We got this. Just try it out. You won't die, right? Like just kind of that calm voice to be like, no worries. So all of this, right? And then also around December, so we're still just talking about like, October, November, December of last year, where all of these things, coaching, do that. Okay. Get a course, which like I said, I finally launched recently. And then in December, it was like, write a book. And this was probably the most confronting of them. If you guys have read my book, my chapter on creativity, I talk about the fact that I never saw myself as a writer. I would write things, but I didn't think that meant I was a writer. Like writers write novels. Writers can't help but to write all the time. I don't know. I had this like vision of what a writer was, and I was like, that's not me. Even though I've been journaling, my entire life, even though I process through and learn things by writing them out. Okay, so right, duh, that makes me a writer, but it took me a little while. So again, I had the whole, really? Okay, kind of response to write a book. So I don't know, when did I start pulling the book together? Actually, around December, January. My process for writing the book is actually pretty interesting because and then I'll tell you kind of why and how I decided when to publish it. We'll get into that in a second. So I was given the information, okay, write this book. And then I was like, okay, like on what? Like not that I don't have anything to say, but like, where am I going with this? And so what I ended up understanding is that 2 things. One, because I'm always writing, that I was to pull in things that I had already written. So in some cases, some of you guys who are also friends of mine might have noticed some of my chapters were taken from pieces of things that I had shared on Facebook about my journey with various things. The money chapter, for instance, is one of those. And the self-abandonment one came from a social media post I had done last year. So it was like, okay, well, that's cool. I have some content written. Let's pull that in. The poems you see in there, all of them were written before I did the book. They were ones that I had come to through journaling, or felt just an impulse to write something, or maybe I was working through something myself, and it just felt like, I had a poem there. And it's interesting I don't think I've shared this much, but the poems themselves tend to be me talking to me, but because I'm not unique, I knew that the poems would touch other people as well. But they tended to be like, you need to remember that you've always been light, which is the chapter right now that's out there on the book club. You have to remember that in darkness is where light comes through, even when you think you can't. I'm paraphrasing. I wish I would have quoted myself better. But, and that's because that poem was at a point in time when I wasn't feeling that, but my noble self was. So she wrote the poem for me, and then I listened and heard it. Welcome, Hoda. So in that process, I just started thinking through and looking at all the various things. Some of these were journal entries, and then in some cases, I just felt like let's do a chapter on whatever topic again, it came to mind. So my noble self was really leading me through the creative process. Now, anyone who might be a creative person, might be an artist or a songwriter or playwright or a writer or whatever, you will probably understand this is just the creative process. Well, I'd been in corporate world for 20 something years. We don't do that. I didn't have the language for all you do is sit and your inner voice will tell you the next thing to do. And you just do it whether or not it makes sense. So it was interesting to me to go through this process. So what I ended up doing was, okay, here's all of the things that exist that I've already written. Here's all the poems I've already written. Here are all the journal entries, all of the Facebook posts, etc. And then I literally sat down and I said, okay, guys, speaking to my work, who wants to be in this book? Which sounds really funny, but it was actually a fun conversation. And so I basically, was listening to my noble self and my intuition. Each time I would like open a poem or whatever, I would hear like a yes or a no. I was like, okay, cool. And so that's how each of the chapters ended up being. And then I was like, okay, cool, you want in. This is even sillier. Which chapter do you want to be? And they'd be like 13. I was like, cool, why not? And so I just threw every single thing just into the book, and I ended up with blanks. In some chapters it was just empty, and I was like, okay, cool, these are empty. Nobody, felt compelled. None of my pieces felt like they wanted to be in that particular spot. And so I was like, okay, well, what's supposed to be here? And then I would get, for instance, one of the chapters there called Universality. Literally the title came, and I was like, universality. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. Oh, well, that's a word. So let's write that down, and then let's see what's supposed to be written there. So in the entire process, it's always just been me. And when I say me, I mean my shadow self, I've got to write a certain way. I've got to structure this some way that makes sense, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But letting that get out of my way and just writing and see what it was that wanted to be written. And I use that language very specifically. What wanted to be there? What part of my pieces wanted to be in my book? Because what I believe is that everything that we create then has a desire to be used in the world, to be shared in the world, to be a conduit to someone else's growth, or if it's something you're creating, a conduit to someone else's experience of beauty or joy or happiness. Everything we do is for that. And so if I had sat down and said, here's the structure of the book, and this is the way the chapters need to be laid out, I may have gotten in the way of where they wanted to be and how they wanted to be told. So even now, as I look at my book and I look through the order, I think, oh, that's really graceful how this chapter led to this poem, led to this next poem, to this next chapter. Like, I would have overthought that. I would have completely made it mechanical and clunky, but it just was like, here it is. And so I will say that in the process of in this case, pulling together and then completing and writing pieces of the book, I'm as much a reader as you guys are. So I still go back to the book itself and be like, oh yeah, this is really helpful, or I really need to remember to be big, for instance, right? That's what I'm kind of talking about today, is learning more about how to do that. Because what I'm learning is that the writings from the book was my noble self, and I still need to reread myself, if that makes sense. And in rereading myself, I learn, and then in you guys reading me, for lack of a better word, in my experience and my journey, you're now tapping into your noble self, because your noble self says, I know that voice, right? That voice sounds like me, like we're related, right? Because we're all souls. That's what the noble self is. And we're all connected to the divine, or to all that is, or to God, or however you feel comfortable connecting with that. And so when you hear someone else's noble self, you start to remember what yours sounds like. Or your noble self gets excited. And you might hear, like, kind of feel her in the body, like, ooh, that thing, that book, that movie, that person, that poem I just read, really, what people will use the phrase, resonated with me. And I think that's connecting to something on a soul level, that there's something about that thing that feels divine. And so kind of connecting with that. So trying to think if there's anything else. I think that's my process for writing the book, but I've got about 5 people who are on, so I want to pause. Burton, great comment. Creativity is not an 8 to 5 job. That is absolutely true. And as I continue my story that I go forward, I'll share more about that as well. But I wanted to pause and see if anyone has any other questions about the book writing process. And we could even get technical if you want to know about publishing, etc., before I move on to the rest of my story. So for those who are on, if there are any questions, I'll open it up right now. And then if you are watching this later, and, first of all, do, make a little comment that says that you're, watching the replay. And then let me know, I've got this question, or I wanted to know this, or that kind of thing. So I'll leave just a couple moments here in case people are typing, before I move on to the rest of my job. Hey Femi, great question. Were you anxious, stressed throughout the process? I would say that I was all things. So there were definitely times when I would get anxious and stressed, and I'll talk about the process that moved me to get the book moved forward quicker than I expected it to. But I think it was a process of sitting, when I noticed I got anxious, I would notice that anxiety is from the shadow self. And so I would pull back in and say, okay, we're good. I feel, this is literally how I would language it. I would talk to my shadow self and say, I get it. I feel you're anxious. I feel you're stressed. Sometimes I would notice it in the moment, sometimes later, to be honest. Observing stress for me is still something that I'm trying to do more of presently versus I was really stressed. Yeah, I got to calm down. So I would have this conversation with me either before or after and be like, and the person having that conversation with me is my noble self. So basically I'm just kind of observing my noble self and my shadow self talking to each other. And the noble self was then saying, it's okay, it's all good, we got this, the universe has this, God's watching out, like all will be well. We always know that we get what we need in every moment, that we always have what we need, and if in that moment we don't have it, it will appear when we actually do need it. And in our anxiety, sometimes we think we need things we don't need. So to handle the stress, I think when it did show up, one was that conversation, but the other also was doing what I've been talking about with the self-love and the self-care, which was, okay, time to take a bath. Okay, you know what? I have done enough. Let's nap. Let's talk to a friend. Let me go for a walk. Let me dance, right? Dancing is a stress reliever for me. So I would spend that time trying to do that. But what I found is that the more that I realized that this process was divine and creative, the more that I leaned into just enjoying the process. And I think that's something that I've learned in this, is that I used to think that things were either stressful or good. And good just being like, oh, this is nice. But I didn't understand that actually we can aim for joy. For whatever reason, I kind of believe, well, no, I mean, joy is for like a few moments in life. And what I mean by joy is like being in the zone and just being like, this is amazing. And oh my gosh, like I feel so happy and centered and all those things. I felt like it was like either things are hard or they're like good, but not like hard or like amazing. And so the more I did this creative process where I was noticing like how the chapters were showing up in a certain way, it was like, oh, wow, this is actually pretty awesome to watch. let me just sit here and observe. And then as I did, I was like, this is amazing to watch. Wow, this is joyful. And so I got to a point where then I wanted to get back to my computer to figure out what the book was supposed to be doing. So I think it's also about permission. So permission to not be anxious or stressed about a big project like making a book, right? I could have literally gotten to my head and be like, I'm writing a book. Oh my God, this is serious. This is something I have to focus on. This is something that like, right? Like I could have gotten into that like thing. Like it's a project, it's important. Therefore, important means not joyful for whatever reason. It means, you know, kind of anxious or stress or whatever. But instead, when I was starting to like enjoy the process and just be there to observe, it was like, oh, doing a big project can be joyful from beginning to end. No way. Is that allowed? Right? So literally I got into this, is that allowed? And I was like, yes, I'm going to give myself permission to enjoy doing a big project and not being stressed out about it. Okay, so thank you for the question, Femi. So let me continue on into my story to kind of give you an idea of where I am now. So I was casually working on my process for writing the book in the spring, January, February timeframe. And at that point in December, I had gotten a new job. The job was going very well. It was pretty stressful, but it was going very well, and all was great. In the beginning of February, I ended up getting COVID. And it was a light case, but I was out for a couple things. One, it was a light case, but I do have a heart condition, and so my cardiologist asked that I not jump right back into work if I can, especially since it was stressful. So I ended up taking off. I was off for about a month, and in that time frame, if anyone's had COVID, I was sleeping a lot. It takes a lot to recover. So at the end of the end of February, I was like, okay, I'm ready to go back to work. I'm excited, to kind of get back to normal. Just been kind of sleeping for a month. That's kind of not me. And, a little bit, I was still working with my coaching clients later in the month when I started feeling better, and here and there looking at the book, things like that. But I was really, working on recovering and being kind of very foggy. So I went back to work, and I've been a project manager and change manager and a whole bunch of other things in corporate world, consultant, the whole thing for a very long time. So I go back to my job, I go back to my client, and I noticed even day one that my brain is really foggy. I'm not able to actually pull together sentences or figure things out or whatever, but I'm like, I'm just out of practice. It'll come through. Plus, I was like, I might not even understand everything talking about in this call because I haven't been here for a month, so that's probably what it was. But my third or fourth day in, I was picking things up, I was trying to pick things up, and I was given a new project, and I was trying to read through the materials on it. Materials that would have taken me like 10% of my brain was taking me like 100%. Like I felt like I had to concentrate super hard. And I was like, I can't make heads or tails. I'm probably still tired, etc. And then I was asked to run a meeting. Now, as a project manager, that's what you do pretty much all day long, constantly, with lots of people, and organizing everyone and telling them what to do and keeping things straight and all that kind of stuff, which, again, is something I can do with 5 or 10% of my brain. I was to run this meeting, and I got to the meeting, and I was literally like, I don't even know where to start. I don't even know how to do any of this. So long story short, I realized that, and my heart was like beating, and I already mentioned I have a heart condition. I was like, oh gosh. And so I was realizing that, for lack of a better word, I had become allergic to my 9-to-5 job. The heart beating, the brain fog, all the things. And it was interesting to me to see that. A couple things. One is that was scary, of course, because, oh my gosh, that's my job. And then also, I had already continued working with my coaching clients and was writing my book. That wasn't showing up when I was doing those things. I haven't talked a ton here about this, maybe a little bit, but one of the things that I truly, truly believe in is listening to my body, listening to our bodies. So when I went to work and my body said, oh God, I can't do this. My brain and nothing's functioning. But it had no problem outside of work. That was my body telling me, this is not for you anymore. And not just, this isn't for you, you can get out of it, eventually. It was, this is not for you, like, seriously, like, you can't do this. But what is for you is what you've been starting to do, the coaching, right? I was at that point creating the course for men and getting excited about that. But all of this was on the side. It was just kind of like a little hobby, or what people kind of say now, like a side gig kind of thing, right? And of course I'd, just been kind of playing around with the book, etc. So I approached my employer and basically said, I need to be on short-term disability again. And while I figure things out, right? And so that's basically what I've been doing, has been trying to figure out what's next. And so in the middle of all of that, I've continued to be like, well, okay, let's see if this continues to be the case, that my body feels not just healthy, but vibrant when I'm doing coaching and courses and continuing to work on this book. And it kept being yes. And I thought, okay, well, let's make this a thing. Let's go forward with this potentially being what I do in the world. How I spend my time, how I make an income, those kinds of things. I was like, let's try it. I won't say I was not scared to death. Still am, to be honest. I don't mean that in a bad way, but I just mean that in a my shadow is saying, this is impractical. You have a job that could make you money. Like, just suck it up, do it. And my body is like, no, don't bring me back there. And my noble self is like, forget about all that. Look at these things we can do. We're enjoying ourselves in this coaching and really finding that we're able to be ourselves more, and in the courses, right? And then so my noble self said, okay, it's time to make this book happen. So the final, even though I'd been playing with it, I ended up from beginning to end in terms of actually, like, I'm working on a book. It was only about a month, and then I published. So that was literally my shadow self getting out of the way. That was a little bit of pushing myself, so a little bit of stress. So Femi, you're right. And I had to learn how to back off from that and be in the creative mode more. And so then I, went ahead and I published my book. And I had every inclination of believing, my noble self was telling me this, that the book was going to be impactful on people. And my shadow self says, no, you can't say that out loud. That's literally what's happening right now. Literally. Current time, my shadow is like, oh, no, you're supposed to be modest and like smaller. But I truly believe, and I'm so happy for the book to be out, because it's impacted me deeply. And what I'm hearing from people is it's impacting you guys deeply as well. And giving myself permission to know that's true and be okay with it and acknowledge it and celebrate it still is something I'm still kind of working through. But I'm pushing past that at this moment, saying, yes, this is amazing. And I am so proud of myself. And I'm so grateful to be the conduit of that, to be able to share with other people. And so what's been happening is that as this has been going on and the book is happening, and many of you guys on this call have been part of, and welcome, by the way, I can see more people have joined. So say hi so I can say hi to you as well, since I don't see your names. So many of you guys who are on this call, of course, this is live in my Facebook group. You've joined my Facebook group, since the launch of the book, and you've been seeing me kind of build things and share things and talking a little bit more about courses. So tonight there's a course that I'm going to be doing on how to know and hear the noble self voice versus the shadow self voice, and be clear about which one is which. And so all these things are happening, right? And so as I did this, I sat down and I said, okay, cool. Like, my main gig where I got started was coaching and courses, and I happen to have a book, and that's really cool, and I'm glad people can read it. Just last week, I want to say. Yeah, I think that's right. Things happen so quickly sometimes. So while I was on vacation, my noble self had a conversation with me and said, okay, I hear where you're going with the coaching and the courses, and that's fun and it's exciting and all that kind of stuff, but you're actually supposed to focus all your time on writing more books. Now, this is another place where I go, really? Okay. Now, here's the very interesting thing about this. Two things. One is that I got that message and it kind of threw me for a loop because it wasn't what I was expecting. I kind of thought, I got this book, this is cool, good to go. There might be other books in the future eventually, maybe not. Like, I don't know. We'll see what happens. Like, very casual to it. But as I've been sharing this with my inner circle, where I'm like, I'm finding out I'm supposed to be just spending my time mostly writing books. Every single one of them was like, yeah, duh. And I'm like, oh, wait, why am I the last to know? So one thing that I'm learning in this process of listening to our noble selves is that because we have lived for most of our lives listening to our shadow, and it's harder to hear our noble voice, we don't catch on quickly. But all of our friends and our family and our close ones, right, the people we fully wholly trust, have always seen our noble self. So if we're wondering who we really are, or who that noble self is, or how they show up in the world when they're in the zone, or we're in the zone with them, and you just don't know, ask a really close friend of yours that you trust. And ask them, if you could see me doing something or being some way that I'm not doing now, what do you imagine for me? See what shows up. So that's why, for instance, for those of you guys who have read my creativity chapter, I talk about my sister saying to me, well, you're a writer. And I was like, I'm a what? This is years ago. And I was like, I don't understand what you mean by that. But she had always seen my noble self. She had always seen that that's what my noble self's role, one of them, was to be, what her design was to be. And she was also tapping into her intuition, because it's not like she'd been seeing me do a lot of writing. She was just like, I don't know, when I think of you, I think writer, right? So that's one of the newer things for me in this discovery process, is that many times, and again, only the people we absolutely trust. It is not good to just ask anyone, anywhere. Some people have agendas for what they tell you. Some people don't know you at all. But the one or two people, or maybe even a slightly small or larger group, just ask them, who have you always thought that I could or would be if I wasn't doing what I'm doing now? And if they're like, oh, absolutely what you're doing now, you're like, okay, great, cool, I just need to do this bigger. But if they're like, yeah, no, I've always seen you as a dancer or this or that, and you're like, oh, I didn't know that. So what I thought I was doing here was sharing my coaching and my courses with everyone eventually through my book. What I'm finding that I'm doing here is becoming an author, right? That feels different to me than a writer, but becoming an author and starting to look at what my next books are, and my coaching and courses end up being kind of a part of that after the books, if that makes sense. Like, it's more like, my tree are the books and my pieces that come off of it, because I'm hearing from you guys, there's a thirst to have the conversation. So my courses are a place for people to have the conversation deeper. Reading the book is one thing, but let's have a conversation together. Let's figure out how this applies in your life, etc. Or you decide how it applies in your life. That's not my job, but you get the idea. And so I have spent the last week or so reconfiguring everything in my brain about how I was constructing things, and what structures I'd created and what timelines I'd created for like a course and a book and all those things, and really had to go into many days of introspection to redo that. And it's been a little like discombobulating to reconfigure, but I'm now coming out the other end, and that's why I wanted to share with you guys that your design is a continual process. I was listening to a meditation yesterday, and I loved how they described the idea of evolution, or evolving, which is basically that we are always evolving because nature is always evolving, right? Trees right now are budding, or in some places now are fully green for the summer. but they're going to evolve through the summer, and then into the fall they'll end up dropping their leaves again, and then they'll evolve into being dormant for the winter time, and then, right, they're continually moving. And while you might say, well, they're just going through their own cycle just in like this, I would say they're going more like this, even the trees, because the tree from last year is not the tree from this year. This year it's a little bit taller. It might have fruit on it. It might have, changed a little bit, in terms of its positioning of where its branches went, etc. Right? And so it's always evolving. Everything is always evolving. So what's important about that is that this idea of following your design or finding it or refinding yourself will always be an evolving process. And to be not only okay with that, but similar to what I talked about with my creative process before, observing it and having fun with it and enjoying it is really where we're supposed to be at. I think many times I would think, okay, evolving, oh shoot, here comes another thing to learn, right? And to be fair, there are times when it does hurt, like, oh geez, got to learn this test again or this lesson again. But I think if we look at it as, wow, well, this new thing that's just come along in my world, I'm really interested to see how I get through it and what I learn from it and what more like my evolving creation comes through it. So similar to the idea of how I was writing my book, I was just, oh, okay, what do we do now? How does this, it's a very different feel than like, oh boy, okay, I'm going through this hard time, and you just kind of soldier through it, shoulder if you want, just kind of push through it. Okay, I'm going to figure it out. And at the other end, I'm going to figure out the lesson. Instead of figuring out, well, how can I relax while this thing is happening? And trust me, relaxing is not my primary place to be, but I'm working on it. But when I've noticed I've been able to do that, then my mind is clearer. I can notice opportunities better. I can feel, what's possible there, and also be upset or sad or whatever about the thing that's happening as well. So seeing ourselves as a creation that's continually evolving, and we are continually creating ourselves, or continually building ourselves, however you want to put it, or compiling maybe even ourselves, means that we are never looking for an end point, and that we're comfortable knowing that what I knew 2 weeks ago, for instance, about myself and my design wasn't wrong. It was just what I understood then. And now what I understand now about my design is something different, and now I'm recalibrating. And so it's not a destination, it's a continual creation, and it's something where we can't just touch into our noble selves and ask them once a year, what am I supposed to be doing? And we get information and we're like, okay, great, I'll talk to you again in a year from now. It needs to be a continual touch in. Right now for you guys, and I'm saying this for you guys in terms of many of you guys took the 7-day self-care challenge or self-love challenge. And in that, every day I asked you to listen to your noble self. So some of you guys might be now daily doing that. Some of you are just coming across the idea of loving yourself and making time to listen to your noble self. Whatever it is, just know that if it's only once a month or once, a quarter, and then it's becoming kind of, once a week, that it is something that we really want to make sure that we are adding into our lives, where it's once a day, or it's before we do the next task. I mean, this checking in with our noble selves becomes so regular that it's just what we do. And it's not because we're questioning what the noble self told us 2 days ago. It's because we just want the next message, like what's happening here. In one of my recordings that I share in the 7-day self-love challenge, I talk about our lives being like a series of dots connected by a line. So if we remember back from geometry, the definition of a line is the connection of one dot to another, or multiple dots to another. Many of us, and I'll use myself as well, many of us go through life with one dot here and then we'll touch base again over here, and so then our line goes here. And then maybe 2 weeks later, we check in again, and there's a line that the dot is now supposed to be here, so then here. So if you've seen what happens, it's hard to see on the screen. I'm now kind of zigzagging through life. Oh, no, do this thing. No, do this thing. Do this thing. And that's kind of a lot of times how most of us feel like making decisions. I think, well, maybe, not sure, whatever. But what I truly believe is that that line needs to be dot line, dot line, dot line, dot line. And right now, I was just kind of showing it in, direction here, but it could be, dot line, dot line, dot line. But you can see now this is going to be more of a curve. And if we think about driving a car, I would definitely rather be on a curvy street, or even somewhat smooth, the more that I talk to my noble self, rather than a zigzag. That's kind of almost impossible. The only road that's like that is, well, not the only, but one of the ones I know is Lombard Street in San Francisco, where it's literally like, back and forth. But that's now just a tourist destination. People don't really use it to get anywhere, but if you're a tourist, you decide you want to go down it because it's fun. But it's not how you want to live your life. So this touching in all the time, and then touching into close people that know us to see what they're seeing, to mirror back to us how they see our noble selves. I think those are the two big things that I've been learning over the last couple weeks. So all of this to say that this has been my journey. This is the kind of the full, and also that as I'm in this community with you, I don't have the answers. I don't really know, but I'm feeling like my design is to share what I understand now, and also share when I don't get it, or when I do get it, or when I don't, so that we all give ourselves permission to be perfectly imperfect creations and just be moving forward with that. So in all of that, I want to conclude. So what am I doing now? You're probably not surprised given what I've been hearing. I'm starting my next book. At the moment, I'm hearing that, let me give context. My first book was about rediscovering your truth and purpose. So it's the beginning of the process of finding your design. It's touching into who you really are, knowing you have a noble self and a shadow self, and all these concepts I've been talking about, and trying to learn into all of those things. The next part, or the next book, I'm understanding for now, is to be the next step, which is refining our design. And so it's kind of what I've been talking about here, some steps and ideas about how do we understand what that is. It's one thing to know who we are and get tools about a noble self, shadow self, learning things through the body, listening to our intuition, trusting ourselves, all of these things that are important because you need that as the foundation. But then it's like, okay, now, or over time, as I get that foundation and I understand it, now what? How does that get me to my design? And so the next book is going to be much more about that process. And then I'm hearing there's a third book. So we kind of have a trilogy going on here. I say this with a weird voice because I'm still like comprehending it and feeling like, okay, this feels big. The third book is about living out that design and how living that design transforms the world around us. And so what I mean by that is it transforms both our actual world, right? How we're acting and doing and what we're doing in our lives and our, calmness and whatever. But it starts to transform our interactions with our friends and family. I'm finding this my own self. And then I also believe that our design is to transform the world, that each of us are here not just to live through life, but to actually collectively create a better world. And if we see ourselves as puzzle pieces, and each of us was designed as a particular puzzle piece, that we all actually did that thing, that we would actually have a beautiful world all put together as a puzzle. But most of us right now are still only using a piece of that puzzle, and so there's holes, or maybe we're just not even our puzzle piece at all. We were told by our parents to do something else, and so we're on some other puzzle somewhere. But if we can actually refine what that puzzle piece, what that design is, and put it in, then we can create and be in a better world altogether. So that's where I see us going further. So in the writing, and giving myself space to do that and permission to write the book, I'm really, really excited. And also continuing to get excited about the courses as well, and figuring out how does that play into the writing. And what I'm finding for me is that, and you guys probably don't know this, but in the course of teaching, which is what I'm doing right now, or educating or sharing, any of those words, but in this course of speaking my truth, I've learned things. There are some analogies I've shared today that I had not thought of before or shared before or realized before. So for me then, what I'm finding is these courses and this my expression of what I'm finding in my own world are new ways and learning and kind of almost research almost to be able to share in my books. So the courses end up being part of that conversation. So I have, as I mentioned before, going to be doing my first course with everyone tonight, for whoever wants to join, or you can. We're also I'm going to offer it. It'll be recorded, so people can also register to get it as well in the future. But it's on discerning between the noble self and the shadow self, and I expect in that conversation I will learn new things. I already have in pulling together the materials, but I expect that as I continue to speak, there'll be more there as well. And then the other thing is, as I mentioned earlier, there is a 6-week course that I've been going through with the men where I've also been learning a lot in that space. And excited, I was told to choose a group of men to do it with, but excited to expand into offering it for a group of women, for whoever might want to work with just women for whatever reason. And then also offering it to a mixed group, just men, women, no big deal. The reason why I keep those separate to a certain extent is that some women and some men may struggle with being fully authentic with people of the opposite sex, especially if they've been hurt in relationships or in friendships, or just have had a bad experience. And I don't want people to be held back by not speaking up because they aren't comfortable. So I want to create spaces for people to be comfortable going into this material and really thinking about how it applies to you. So sometime in the next, I don't know, probably a couple weeks or so, I'll share more about that course. And there are other ones that come after it as well, that I'll be sharing about. So just wanted to kind of give you an idea of my journey, my continual unfoldment of my own design. And I fully expect that what I understand today will be different than what I understand a week from now, 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now, next year. And I, even as a recovering perfectionist, and I say recovering means it's still in me, still working through being perfectionist, that I'm embracing being okay with ever evolving and being okay with being not quite aligned in my past or not quite aligned in my present, and that's okay. I can be perfectly imperfect in my creation. So super excited about that. Okay, so I think those are all the things I wanted to share today. I'm super excited. I'm always loving. I'm seeing all the messages here, like the emojis, and Burton, the transformation from your shadow self, old job, to your noble self, writing and sharing the process. Yes, exactly. And it's interesting because I will say that I have loved my job for a very long time. It really did pull a lot of my strengths. And my evolving noble self is saying, yeah, of course, but use those strengths elsewhere for our full design, for the full bigness of who we need to be. So I will miss the work, but know that I'm already using a lot of the skills that I used there. And then, yeah, always evolving, taking time every day, emojis, and yes, Burton, exactly. Creating safe spaces. And that's one thing I would encourage everyone as you are kind of joining me in this community and in whatever process, just reading the book or maybe engaging in courses or the Facebook community or whatever it is, that you determine what safe spaces you have in your own world. You might notice things starting to change and shift in you. Be very selective about who you choose to bring into your journey. Find just a few people because you really want to make sure they're people that wholeheartedly support you on your journey. Sometimes other people's shadow selves can show up when they're seeing you get bigger or you live out your design because they're jealous. And I don't mean jealous in like that way. Maybe I want to use a totally different word, but they are yearning for what you're doing, but their shadow self is pulling them back. And so you don't want to have to navigate someone else's discomfort with your growth. Find those key people, hopefully you already have them or know who they are, to be sharing what you're learning about yourself, and let the rest be. You'll see the rest of it, be shared with the world. I will tell you that the journey I've just shared now here, at the very beginning, it was 2-3 people that knew, over time. And then now, like maybe in the last month or so, it's gotten to be a bigger group. And then this is my first time, so when we're really going through growth, it's important to think of it like a small little sapling or the beginning of the buds of a plant of some sort. Protect it. Really just spend time nurturing it, being with it. Don't walk out into the grocery store and tell everyone what you're doing. I got this thing and I'm growing or whatever. Nurture it. Keep it to yourself for now, for multiple reasons, but one of them is exactly what Burton just said about the safe space. Just give it safety while it's little, while it's still trying to burgeon itself. So I want to thank you guys for allowing me to have a space to be able to share on a larger platform, that my little growth has now become strong enough and big enough of a tree that it can be shared larger in the world. And I'm super excited to see what the next steps are, and having you guys on that journey with me and me on your journey with you would be wonderful. And Hoda, noble self versus my shadow. I love that. Thank you for sharing your motivating thoughts and wisdom. Of course, Hoda. It's so good to see you. I know it's been more years than I like to count since I've seen you, but I'm so glad to have you on here. So thank you to everyone who has joined in live. Excited to also hear from you if you're joining us on the replay later. And just so happy to have a space to be able to share. Thank you all. Love you. Talk to you soon.